As we bring our final panel up to the front here, it's the local perspective. These are three folks who are from here or close to here, Northwest Arkansas, shall we say. Colby Beland is the Vice President in Sales and Marketing at Casestack. We had a fine dinner with him last night. He's close, Fort Smith. So, Rich Lawrence is the Vice President of Special Markets at Helen of Troy. And Dennis Hunt is the Executive Vice President and Manager of Public Finance at Stevens. You might have heard of that company around here. Thank you very much. We're going to go in order as we go down. So Colby, Rich, and then... Okay. Hello? Hello? I'm going to use this one. This one's hot. There we go.
Can you hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here today because I am not an economist, similar to Ann's comments, but I'm thankful to be here. So these are my opinions, clearly, since I'm not an economist. My topic today is about supply chain. And being here in Arkansas, supply chain represents probably 1 in 8 or to 1 in 10 people employed in the state in some form or fashion. So supply chain touches a lot of people in this economy, but it also represents a very large part of the GDP. So today, my primary topics are going to be the impact of unemployment. I guess I'm going to back up a second. Been sitting here listening all day, watching all these different slides, listening to the Federal Reserve talk, and I consider myself not an economist, a business person, but after watching and hearing the analysis and analytics that everybody is looking at, the decisions that I use to make my business are very much economic based. What I mean by that are there's 3 primary areas that I focus on when I'm working on budgets and planning for the future for our company. And one of the things I look at is rig count. Monet was talking about Texas and the rig count, and in 2014, the rig count reached the highest in the industry. There's over 1,600 rigs operating domestically in the United States. Today, the rig count is down in the 800s. So when she was talking about the drop-off from 2014 till today, you see the impact in the supply chain. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. Simple economics, supply and demand. There are only so many trucks on the road. There's only so much space in a trailer, and it relates to capacity. So capacity in the supply chain is driven by multiple things, and oil and gas is one of those things. Not the price of oil, it has an impact, but the actual rig count impacts capacity in the supply chain. And I'm going to show a slide here in a second to kind of support what I'm talking about. But so rig count, price of oil, government regulation, and the price of gold. Those are the 4 things that I use to predict or understand what is getting ready to happen this year or 5 years from now in our industry. So if you could put that slide up for me. I wasn't planning on doing any slides today, but after seeing all the slides and trying to tie this all together, I thought this slide did it really well. So Monet's presentation talked a lot about the decline from 2014 till current date. And you can see here, this is truckload capacity in the supply chain from 2010 to 2017. And you can see the brown line. Which one of these is the... You see this brown line? That's the capacity in 2014, or the capacity shortage in 2014. You can see that the demand in 2014 was the greatest that it's been in a very long time, right? Well, in 2014, we're talking about how good the economy was, and we're talking about a rig count of 1,600 rigs. We're talking about price of oil of just below $100 a barrel. We're talking about unemployment All those things were phenomenal in 2014. And then 15 is the green. You see a significant drop off from 14 to 15. And then 16 is the blue, and it drops even further. And then here we are today in the red, 2017, and you're starting to see this capacity crunch hit. So I'm going to go back to 2014. With the rig count being at 1,600, it's impacting capacity in the supply chain. Because when all those rigs are operating, they have to have supplies, they have to have product to keep them operating, and they're taking capacity out of the supply chain, whether it be rail, whether it be full truckload, whatever it is, they're taking that capacity out to support the oil and gas field. And that impacts cost, right? As the demand goes away, it impacts the cost. So in 2014, it was what we called a carrier market. Carriers could charge basically whatever they wanted to charge because there was no capacity. Well, the oil field dropped at the end of 2014. It crashed, right? You see what happened, the correlation in capacity of this green line in 15 and where it ended, right? There's a direct correlation to what is going on with the price of oil and in the oil field itself, the rig count. I pay a lot of attention to that rig count. So today, we're seeing capacity get tight again. Well, as Monet spoke earlier, price of oil is $55. It went to $60 today. Capacity is starting to get tight as the rig count continues to go up. In 2016, the rig count got down in the 400s. We're back today just short of 900. So we're well short of the 16, but it's growing. And you're starting to see that impact. And then the other comment that was made today was lack of little impact from hurricanes, Harvey, Irma, Maria. We're getting ready to see a very different impact in the supply chain. We're going to see a catastrophic impact. And what do I mean by that? Truck drivers don't want to drive trucks. Just in general, truck drivers don't want to drive trucks. So as the rebuilding process from Harvey and Irma and Maria take place, those truck drivers are going to get out of their seats and they're going to go build houses so they can be home every night. And when they do that, it's going to take away the available capacity. We have already seen, just in the short term impact of Harvey and Maria, truckload transportation rates have increased 10 to 20% depending upon the market that you're in. Overnight, impact of the hurricane, 10 to 20% increase in cost. Well, as the truck drivers decide to switch industries and get back into construction, that's going to take more capacity out, and it's going to drive costs even higher. So as we go into end of 2017, going into 18, costs in our industry, looking at more microeconomic of just supply chain industry, transportation, costs are going up. But then it trickles over to retail, right? As our costs go up, we've got to pass that cost on to the suppliers that are selling in retail. So their costs are going to go up, and which ultimately impacts retail, the shelf price, right? So we're getting ready to see this, but this shortage of drivers in the industry is real. It's been real just because of the curve, right? I mean, more people are retiring and millennials don't want to drive trucks, and with the immigration policies that we have, it's hard to get them in seats. So as this rebuilding process takes place, we're facing the largest capacity crunch that we have seen or are likely going to see at any time. And so as I'm watching this rig count climb, as I'm watching unemployment be at all-time lows, here in Northwest Arkansas, we're at basically 2.5% unemployment. State of Arkansas is below the national average at about 3.5% unemployment. But even the national average of where it's at, it still kind of just suggests full employment. I mean, it's very difficult to find good people. So as transportation companies, whether they be parcel, LTL, truckload, ocean, finding people that can fill those jobs is going to be more and more tough. And that's going to create economies of scale that are going to cost more money. So supply chain costs are going to be impacted significantly, in my opinion, over the next 2 years, pretty dramatically. And it's as a result of oil, hurricane, and then the Amazon effect, because the Amazon effect is changing the supply chain completely. The one other statistic that I look at is inventory levels. We support the retail industry, so I look at retail inventory levels and I look at supplier inventory levels, and it's kind of an indicator of what is getting ready to happen. The interesting thing about that, it makes it difficult indicator today, is the omni-channel and the changes that are happening make it very difficult to tell what inventory levels should be, because all retailers are adjusting their inventory levels and nobody really knows where they're going to fall or where they should be and what they mean, today's numbers versus last year's numbers versus 2 years ago's numbers. In 2014, Walmart built 354 new stores in 2014. In 2017, they're going to build 38. And in 2018, they're only going to build 23. That's, when I say stores, that's supercenters, neighborhood markets, that's everything. So for 2018, their plan is 23 stores. 3 years ago, in 2014, it was 354. The dynamics are changing, and it's making it very difficult to see, from a business perspective, how to plan, because the Amazon effect is, the ripple effects are so far reaching. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to let Rich talk, and then we'll do some Q&A here in a second.
Is this live? I think it's this one. This one's live? Okay. Let me just preface what I'm going to say. These are my opinions only. Since I am an officer of a publicly traded company, these are my opinions only. It's not Representative Helen or Troy. And it's good to be here. I've learned a lot from the presentations. I should just say, whatever Ann said, just ditto that about retail. But I will add on some of what Colby was saying. And in retail in general, I think I try to bookend everything. I think the bookends are stability, instability. And what I mean by that is stability is profit certainty. And instability is profit uncertainty. How do I take profit in that entire supply chain? And three fundamental things that are occurring. Value is being recalculated. If you look at retail in general, brick and mortar retail, and you can even say this in e-commerce, is who is growing is what we would say is a value channel. Dollar General is growing, Ross is growing, TJ Maxx is growing. What is happening there with the consumer that says, did they all of a sudden downshift and say, I want to buy garbage goods? That is not what they're saying, right? And there's very few companies out there that really understand what is being said about that. You could argue that at this time in history, consumers know more about true pricing than they ever have. And that's driving a piece of it. If you go online now and you go to buy a hairdryer, and you look at the factories in China that make hair dryers, they post online on Amazon the same hair dryer that is being made for a major manufacturer in the US. The problem is they got the pricing wrong. They'll put the same hair dryer that somebody stamps with, I won't name a name just because I have competitors, but if you have brand X, the factory in China sells it as a third party on Amazon at $100. But you can buy that hairdryer for $25 at Walmart. What happens when they figure that out? That's an interesting concept. The number of products that are manufactured in China that are rebranded and sold in the US, that's a big deal, right? Something to keep your eye on, because that's something that I think can upset the apple cart. Amazon in general, who's a member of Amazon Prime? How many packages, I'll just pick on you guys, how many packages from Amazon do you get at your house a week? 1? 5? Yeah, I have a teenage daughter, I get like 3. So I don't know what the average is, and Colby could probably talk to this, but the cost of that small package to get there, we joke about it internally as it's Amazon Ponzi, right? Because at what point does that break, right? Bezos is an awesome PR person. So if it's $12 to get that package, I'm getting 3 of those a week that come on separate days. Within 2 months, he's losing money on me because I always select 2 days. Boom, right? But Bezos says, hey, we're offering it to Mexico now. We're offering it to the UK. I think he has to, right? So you look at retail in general, I think retail by and large has been an evolutionary change, right? You can test and make mistakes, course correct. When you have a retail revolution, you have winners and losers, right? And I think so you kind of have, everybody kind of channels a 2-horse race now between Walmart and Amazon. Amazon says we're building a new headquarters. 2 weeks later, Walmart says we're building a new headquarters. It always looks like one's lagging the other. And at some point, they're going to get that competition right. You asked the question earlier, how do you prevent the race to the bottom? And no one has a clear solution. Right now, the retailer solution is the vendor pays, right? Or we don't sell them, and then you have the standoff, and everybody holds their breath. It'd be interesting to look at how much volume is actually done in that standoff, because I know what it is for us and how much of our business is at risk when we say we're not going to pay for your race to the bottom. The retailer sets the price, not the vendor, right? But so it's kind of interesting. I don't know any other arena where I can be held hostage to pay for my partner's decision. It's difficult, right? So it's interesting, but they're going to ask. And Colby mentioned this, you look at inventory. Inventory is the dirty secret in consumer packaged goods. When Walmart was building 350 stores a year, I think each supercenter has between $7 and $15 million in inventory. So consumer packaged good companies could inflate their numbers basically by that store growth, because I'm going to jam those stores with inventory. Now you're in a situation where you actually have to grow a brand organically. It's tough. The skill set that's necessary to grow business in that environment is tough to find. So when you say you have all these open positions, part of it is, what is the skill set necessary to do that? What's the skill set necessary to purchase or figure out what I'm going to buy to sell in a deflationary economy or an inflationary economy? You look at the buyers who are buying now, what was the economic environment that they grew up in? Because that's where they know how to buy. And that's an issue moving forward. So when I say it's, the bookends are stability, instability, I think that plays across a wide array. And how we take profit going forward in retail is going to be recalculated. And there'll be new metrics. Amazon's going to recalculate this. Everybody's worried about how they bought Whole Foods. What do they really want to do there? Private label is going to be a factor in North America like it never has been. It'll squeeze brands, it'll squeeze people's profit stream. But in aggregate, I don't really see, everybody says, oh, my Amazon business is up. Total business is not up. It's a shift. So I echo Ann's commentary. I view Walmart and any other retailer at that, close to that scale, they are a distributor. The people who sell to them, they have to start looking at them that way. Right now, they look at them in terms of channels and they fund them. They fund their promotions in a channel strategy and just saying you're the final portal to get to the consumer. So I think both those things have to change to make a fundamental shift in how business is looked at in retail. One of the debates we have at the Walton College is, do you even want the word retail? Shouldn't it just be commerce? So it's a broader term, because when you say retail, it's no longer folding sweaters at the Gap. Commerce, what does it all entail? Everything in there. So that's my story on retail.
work better on my feet. Is this on? First of all, good afternoon, and I know you've been very patient in terms of participating in this event, and I want to thank you for that. I'd like to also thank the Global Independence Center and the University of Arkansas for sponsoring and hosting this, and Michael Drury, I'd also like to thank you for chairing it. I know that these are very difficult events to try to pull off, and we appreciate your involvement in chairing this event. Also, to Colby and Rich, thank them for their outlooks as it relate to the supply chain and to retail. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you from this panel and kind of focusing on a local perspective of the national economic outlook. I think I need to put my comments in the proper context because I need to share with you a brief overview of Stephens Inc. and my role at Stephens. Stephens is a full-service investment banking firm, and we're located in Little Rock, Arkansas, for those that you don't know where Little Rock is, and with offices nationwide as well as offices in London, England, and Frankfurt, Germany. As such, our and my perspective is probably more consistent with a national or international view than it is just simply a local view. However, at Stephens, I serve as the head of the Public Finance Division, which encompasses markets in 8 states, primarily in the Southeast. You could kind of think of the Southeastern Conference if you're involved in athletics, and we're covering most of those particular states. In my role, I have the opportunity to observe the economies in each of these states, and as you would imagine, there are significant differences in the economic vitality of the states in which we have a presence. Many are doing extremely well, as some of the previous speakers have noted, primarily Texas. Texas is doing extremely well in terms of the overall economic vitality. And then there are others that are struggling. Many of those are related to, as other speakers have said, more the agricultural states, more the energy states, primarily the state of Mississippi and the state of Louisiana are having the greatest difficulty in terms of recovering from the financial conditions that occurred back in 2008, 2009. Today, my perspective on the national economy are primarily influenced by the most recent economic outlook of Dr. Tom Goho. Dr. Goho is an economist that has served as the chief economic consultant for our firm for the past several years. That's more what the economy looks like today. Well, then I will share with you my comments regarding personal economic outlook for the growth of the national economy. And those are based pretty much on my observation, study, and experience in each of the states of which we have a presence. First, let's look at where we are today as a national economy, and then I'll outline what I believe are the key factors that will shape the economy in the future. Anyone who reads the Wall Street Journal knows the United States has experienced economic growth and real domestic product of about 2% since the end of the financial crisis in 2009. That's been repeated a number of times with the speakers here today. Given that the United States real GDP has grown at rates in excess of 3% prior to the Great Recession, many economists view the recent 2% growth rate as subpar. There are serious disagreements between liberal and conservative economists, just like pretty much with liberal and conservative whatever these days in terms of disagreements, about the performance of the economy during the last 8 years. Liberal economists point to the fact that the economy was in crisis situation during the recession, that President Obama played some role in avoiding a financial disaster, although the recovery was slow, and after 7 years of slow growth, the economy was very close to non-inflationary output potential. So although the growth has not been to that 3 or 4%, it was pretty much meeting his potential after the 7-year period. Conservative economists have a very different analysis of the past 8 years. They point out that other presidents such as Bill Clinton, George Bush, Ronald Reagan each faced recessions, and through policy changes were able to fairly quickly move the economy toward a high and sustained growth. These conservatives argue that the recovery over the last 8 years has been modest at best, with the economy underperforming throughout this period. Conservatives argue that the wise policies and the economy could have reached its potential much faster than what occurred following the recession of 2009. Of course, the economic potential of the economy is not cast in stone. Changes in government policies can increase the potential of the American economy. Policy changes that improve the economy could induce more people back to the workforce, entice more businesses to make investments in terms of plants and equipment, and also encourage more foreign companies to establish in the United States, as well as other economy-enhancing practices. I think it is obvious, though, that given our track record, it is that Congress has a poor track record of moving in a timely and thoughtful fashion as it relates to tax and employment issues. I think the recent failure of the health care debate and making changes is evidence of that poor track record. Consequently, I think most expect economic growth of about 2 to 2.25% will occur over the next 12 to 18 months, a rate that's not much inconsistent with the GDP performance of the last years. One of the key conditions, and we've heard this touched upon a little bit throughout the day, but I don't think you can overstress the importance of this. One of the key conditions in the U.S. labor market that constrains economic growth is the availability of an American labor force. Due to demographic shifts, it is likely the labor force impediments will continue at a slow pace over the next 5 to 10 years. Basically, we are not generating enough warm bodies to continue to achieve a 3 to 4% GDP based on everything else that has happened in the past in terms of if everything else remains fairly consistent. So as a result, many economists forecast growth of the American labor force would decelerate from the long run rate by almost 2/3 from 1.4% per year to about 0.5% in the next decade. Labor productivity gains in the next 4 years will also likely decelerate from about 1.7% to 1.2% growth in the next 4 years and decrease by more than half between 2021 and 2027. The growth rates of labor productivity are directly linked to growth and composition of the U.S. population, and those trends are not encouraging. For example, labor force growth is modest among the youngest potential workers who are likely to be either in school or starting new careers as young, inexperienced workers. Among the workers 45 to 64, who would be at the peak of their labor productivity at that particular point in time, are experiencing no growth, and projections show almost no growth in the years ahead. In addition, experienced workers 65 and older are exiting the labor market completely as they retire. For example, by age 63, half of the American workers have retired, and 2/3 have retired by the age of 65. During the recent period of slow but steady growth in the economy, combined with its neutral or negative demographic trends, have produced dramatic shifts in the current labor market. Conditions are beginning to tighten for employers. We've heard that over and over today. Fewer and fewer people to take care of the demands for the labor market. Conditions are beginning to tighten for those employers, and qualified potential employees are difficult to find in many sectors of the economy, including manufacturing. During the height of the 2008-9 financial crisis, almost 7 unemployed workers were applying for one job opening. So you had one job opening, 7 people were interested in finding that job opening. In early 2007, that ratio had dropped to 1 to 1. Another concerning factor in terms of where our labor supply is to meet the demands associated with a growing economy. As such, labor market conditions tied to demographics of the labor force are hindering acceleration in economic growth from the current 2% to a desired 3 or 4%. In light of highly experienced older workers retiring in large numbers and the prime age workers are not increasing, the workforce is not likely to be an engine for higher economic growth. In the short run, it is anticipated the economy will create jobs at a rate, which it has for the last several years, of about 200,000 jobs per month, which will hold unemployment at near a rate under 5%. However, the economy is about as good as it gets during a transition period of presidential administration, as evidenced by the following conditions. The business sector is creating a healthy number of jobs, obviously, more creating the jobs and not having the people to fill those positions. The unemployment rate is close to full employment level. Inflation is under the target rate that the Reserve wants to do of 2%. And monetary policy is relatively easy. I know there are threats it may not be quite as easy, but relatively speaking, it is extremely easy right now and has been for a number of years. meaning that the Fed is unlikely to create significant interest rate headwinds for economic growth. This is even more certain, in my opinion, with the President's recent nomination of Jay Powell to serve as the new Fed chairman, which I think he will be pretty much consistent with what we have had in the past as it relates to being very cautious in terms of increasing the interest rate environment. So that's kind of where we are now. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about my personal opinion as it relates to the economic outlook. And I certainly do not know what the economy is going to do in the future, nor do probably anyone else really know. But I want to share with you some things that I think are important as it relates to that economic outlook. And many of those things have been discussed earlier today. Given the current economic and demographic environment, how does the economy move from a stagnant 2% growth rate that we've experienced during the last years to achieve a growth rate of 3 to 4%? In my opinion, it involves a variety of steps at the national level to enhance our economy. I like to describe it with the acronym of TRIP, T-R-I-P. T stands for tax reform, as we've discussed, trade policies, and technology. Those three aspects are critically important to be able to achieve that 3 to 4% growth rate that I think everyone is desiring. Tax reform changes are necessary, and in the corporate tax policies will be extremely important in terms of our economic growth. Lowering the corporate tax rate will be an important first step. With respect to trade policies, the United States is a highly competitive country with active trade agreements with many other countries. We are in a global economy which necessitates global trade. It would be a terrible mistake for the economy if we took an isolationist approach to international trade. And finally, under the T is technology. The advent of additional technology advancements will have a significant impact to our growth of the economy. If those happen, like they did in the 1990s, it can overcome a lot of other deficiencies associated with the economy, but that will be an important aspect if the overall economy is going to grow. R stands for regulatory reform. That was discussed earlier. Let me give you a little bit of statistics about it. During the last 8 years, it's estimated that the private sector incurred a cumulative $890 billion in additional federal compliance costs, including but not limited to energy, environmental, healthcare, labor, and financial regulations. I think, as Bill pointed out earlier, there are a number of financial institutions that probably are not going to survive. There are a number of investment banking firms that are probably not going to survive. And that's only what I'm familiar with in terms of the financial area. Now, if as a country that's what we're wanting to create, where we're going to limit the number of folks and the market's not going to do that, then that may be the path we want to go down. But I don't think that it probably makes sense to have a robust economy with the significant amount of regulation. It seems to me balancing the need of these regulations with a view on their economic impacts will be extremely important for the future growth of our economy. I stands for immigration policy. I don't want to get into what kind of immigration policy and all that, but just look at the numbers is all I'm suggesting that you do. Given the demographic structure of the American labor force, we need immigrant workers in many sectors of the economy. Without these immigrant workers, America's economic growth will continue to struggle to achieve 3 to 4% growth rate. To illustrate, in 2014, immigrant workers earned approximately $1.3 trillion and paid approximately $329 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. Immigrants contributed about 15% of the country's output in 2014. A well-thought-out immigration policy that encourages appropriate immigrant workers to enter the United States will be a positive as it relates to our future economic growth. Finally, P, which stands for productivity improvement, which all of these are basically related to productivity. But we're going to have to focus on education and training, and a changing economy will be salient if we strive to increase our output per worker. Investing in education and training for our labor force will be a necessary component associated with a thriving economy. Is TRIP likely? Probably not, at least in totality. But if we're dedicated as a country on focusing and addressing these critical elements that influence our economy, I believe that the outlook for a strong and thriving economy is certainly within our reach. I believe that it will take the effort as it relates to what Colby talked about as the supply chain and what Rich talked about as it relates to retail activity will be cornerstones associated with it. But these particular issues that I just outlined for you will be extremely important in able to achieve a 3 to 4% growth rate for our economy. Again, thank you to the GIC and the U of A for hosting this event, and thank each of you. It's been a long day, and I appreciate you participating in our panel discussion, and I believe each of us are available now to address any questions that you have. Thank you.
Colby, one for Rich. For Colby, I would guess from your remarks that you're a huge booster of automated self-driving trucks. If you could give us what you think, how fast that'll happen. And for Dennis, somewhat off the wall, but given what your background, is there any hope for Puerto Rico at all?
So regarding self-driving autonomous trucks, is there a future? Sure. I believe it's down the road. Too much government regulation in the way. Where I see the biggest advancement will likely be in autonomous drones that are wheeled, not flying. So FAA is going to control air drones. So Bezos's marketing ploy for drones is what it is. It was a great marketing ploy, but I think that's 10 to 15 years from even being a reality, but I'm not even sure it's a reality then. I do believe that you're going to see self-driving wheeled drones, whether it be the size of a wagon or the size of a smart car, that will be able to go down a sidewalk, pull up to an apartment complex, and then deploy smaller wheeled drones that will go out and deliver prescriptions or Amazon or UPS or FedEx or whatever it may be. I mean, think about the efficiency of a FedEx or UPS van pulling up to an apartment complex in a big truck, their big brown truck. They open up the back door and they set these little wheeled drones that go down and drop packages off versus a guy walking, schlepping packages back and forth. So I think wheeled drones are a very much reality, and I think you will already, we're seeing it here on the University of Arkansas. They're testing them. It's a beta site for drones. But I think that technology, as same challenges that Uber had in getting market share and getting into communities, some laws and regulations have to be changed to allow them to work and to operate within these city governments. But I think because it's at the city level, not a national or federal level, you're going to be able to see wheeled drones become a reality very soon, like in the next couple of years. And I think where you'll really see it deployed is in bigger cities, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, where they can, whether it be UPS or FedEx or Amazon or whoever it is, pull a larger device with these self-manned delivery vehicles that will go out and deliver packages or prescription drugs or food. Think about a pizza delivery company that can pull up to an apartment complex and this thing goes and delivers 20 pizzas with one person versus 20 drivers having to do it. So that would be as far as trucks, Walmart has had an advertisement that they have working on autonomous driving trucks. An 80,000-pound vehicle going down the road without a person behind the wheel is not something that I see insurance companies or government regulators allowing anytime soon.
I don't know what perspective I have on that. I'm surprised we haven't seen Amazon buy a trucking company or, the final mile delivery. I fully expected to see Amazon airplanes, and I remember a couple of years ago talking to some students at the Walton College about that how do they streamline the cost in that whole process? Has anybody seen Amazon Spoon? It's the next step, right? Instead of them just coming and putting the stuff in the refrigerator, they just spoon feed you. Yeah, right? And then there's Amazon Toilet and Amazon Landfill. It has limits. I think everything, when you Colby alluded to this. A lot of it is Bezos' PR machine. I expect he'll announce something. If you look at when he announced drones, it was before Cyber Monday. Everybody's talking about Amazon on Monday. So a lot of that, I don't, you look at it as kind of an evolutionary change. I don't know how much of it is revolutionary, but it gets a lot of talk. And I always say the two things that'll make you successful is imagination and execution. Great imagination, I don't see the execution of it.
Not without U.S. government assistance. I don't think there's any way that they're going to recover, given the amount of debt that they have, and the hurricane only exacerbating the problem.
I do have a comment that I'd like to make. I left out one important piece of this chart. I mentioned government regulation as one of the things that I look into the impact of the supply chain. And in 2014, one of the things that was driving this huge capacity shortage was when the hours of service regulations went into effect. So it took a lot of capacity out of the marketplace, in addition to the rig count and the oil field booming and being at its all-time high, those factors. So when I talk about another capacity crunch looming, you see right here the red trend is up, right? Well, we have a government regulation going into effect next month called ELD, electronic logging devices. And so carriers, truckers are no longer going to be able to use the manual book and say, I only drove 8 hours today, I only drove 10 hours today. It's going to be electronic. They're not going to be able to fudge, right? And a driver under today's regulations are allowed 11 hours of work time and 10 hours off, and only 60 hours a week behind the wheel. Well, if I pull up to Walmart and it takes me 4 hours to get unloaded, that goes against my 11 hours of driving time. Well, under a manual book, they would say that 4 hours was rest because they were sitting in their cab playing on their iPad or talking on the phone or taking a nap or a shower or whatever it was. So with the ELDs going into effect in December of this year, one of two things is going to happen. The smaller independent guys that can't afford the technology are going to leave the marketplace. They're going to take fewer trucks off the, less trucks on the road, which drives up demand, capacity. And then just the actual impact of hours available for drivers is going to be reduced, and you're taking more capacity out of the marketplace. So when you talk about the Harvey ripple effect of taking drivers out of the seats, you talk about government regulation, and then you talk about the oil field stabilizing and coming back, that's when I'm talking about this capacity crunch that is coming for the transportation industry, which then ripple effects into all these other, supply chain is kind of the backbone. And my opinion, we're getting ready to see a pretty significant cost. Short-term 10% increase, right? Well, when these electronic logging devices go into effect, and if we lose, right now, estimations are there are 1 million trucks without ELDs, and we're 3 weeks away, right? And so they have two choices. They're not going to, if you don't have an ELD as a trucker, they're not going to force you to get off the road until April of 2018. If you don't have an ELD in April, you're off the road regardless. But between now and April, you're subject to fines and penalties. And so the small independent guy that can't afford the ELD, does he take the penalties until he gets pushed, to physically have to pay them or go to jail? But at some point, the capacity is going to go away, right? And so simple economics, capacity and supply and demand, right? So I foresee this price increase impacting the supply chain, and it's not just in retail, but across the board and in all categories. I think that's one of the biggest things that is going to potentially drive inflationary, type growth. Massive? No. Are we going to get to above 2%? Probably not. But it helps us probably get back to that 2% or closer to that 2% number, because this is something that is truly going to drive costs. So.
Based on, to follow up on what you had to say, I'm wondering to what extent the technology and robotics and all of that will absorb some of the labor shortages that you've addressed, and more importantly, what steps do we need to take to get there, and how do you handle the impact to the existing labor force on how those changes will affect them?
It's a good question. The bottom line is we are living in a world where technology is going to drive everything. And the more technology that we have, whether it be autonomous vehicles, whether it be artificial intelligence, whether it, one of the things that blows me away is geofencing from a marketing standpoint. I would probably, if I started looking at any of my social media feeds, whether it be LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, there's likely people in here that you've been geofenced, that I will start seeing advertisements for your business in my social media feeds because we're in the same room together. And that's just kind of the artificial intelligence that is taking over business and how business is done and how people market and sell their products. And the same type thing is going to happen from a transportation and supply chain perspective, from a technology perspective. If we don't have the labor pool to fill the positions, then we have to do more with less, and the only way to do more with less is through technology, right? So there are a lot of advancements that have taken place in technology, but we're at a point from both a supply chain perspective and a retail perspective of unprecedented time and unprecedented change. And we're going to see more changes in the next 5 years and then in the next 10 years than have happened in the last 40 when it comes to retail and supply chain. And it's all going to be done through technology, artificial intelligence, and the use of new technologies of autonomous vehicles and things to that nature. So I think about my grandfather and all the things that he used to tell me that he saw in his lifetime, from a light, a TV, a telephone, a man on the moon, and how amazed he was. I just think what has happened in the last 10 years and the power of my phone and what it can do today versus 10 years ago versus what a computer could do in the 1960s. It's mind-boggling. The new iPhone X, you just look at it, and that there's no thumbprint, there's no home button. You just look at it, and it's all facial recognition software, right? The world that we're going to is changing at an unprecedented pace, and those that are able to keep up with the technology play, that's what's going to make the difference in this unemployment, full employment situation that we're in as far as filling the positions.
I don't know. You struck a thought to me. I always, you look at Amazon or all these e-commerce plays, and does anybody ever stop to say what happens when you offer all products at any time, anywhere, for the best price? Right? The economy in itself means scarcity, but when you eliminate scarcity, what's happened to Black Friday? It's dead. And so I think your question is, how do we evaluate the future world that we're prescribing? Yeah, I don't know. I always, in class, I always ask kids, if you're Columbus, you're going to the future world, what do you pack? Right? What's the scenarios he planned for? Well, you're in the same boat, right? We're headed to the future world. What is it? And where do you place your bets? When ATMs launched, people said, you know what, bank branches are done. What happened? They built more bank branches, right? Who predicted that? So I don't, predictive analytics is huge, but figuring out where to place the bet in that world, I don't know. I think we need a lot of people studying what is the future world we're going to, because it's not as easy as Columbus packing his ships and coming now, because there's so many variables.
Actually, I got a good story on that real quick, if you don't mind. So I was at a conference last week that Walmart was hosting, and this executive was telling a story that 7 years ago, the analytics said business cards are dead, or not business cards, but greeting cards are dead, right? Printed greeting cards are dead. Get them out of the stores. You're taking up valuable retail space. You got to get rid of them. And he said, we decided not to do that. And actually, the margins that they make on printed greeting cards is one of the highest categories within the store. And the amount of retail, you think about the amount of shelf space that the greeting card section, takes up. But at the end of the day, this technology, everything that's being technology driven, we as humans, the one thing that you can do is give somebody a handwritten card on their birthday or Christmas or Mother's Day or Father's Day or whatever that's personal. It's a personal item. And 7 years ago, everything told Walmart, get them out of the store, get them out of the store, get them out of the store, and they chose to keep them. So he went on to say is, what does a store look like, right? The question was, what does a future store look like? And he's like, I can't tell you that. And he used that story as an example of, if I was to go build a store today of what the future is, we're not ready for it, and we may fail. So we're only going to build 23 stores next year because we don't know what the future is, and we're going to continue to invest in e-commerce, right? So I just thought that was an interesting story, that the future, nobody knows what it is, and they're not willing to gamble, to your point. That we're not, as Walmart, we're not willing to gamble on building this future store when things haven't played out yet. And we really don't know what all this technology means and what the impact is. So anyway, I thought I'd share that.
I would submit to you that the economy and technology is not fair to everyone. That, if I made 8-track players and produced 8 tracks in the past, it wasn't fair to me what technology. If I owned a Blockbuster video, it's not fair. But those things change. And you even argue in a current situation, the president of the United States was elected by many people who are in the coal mining industry. And basically my understanding is, even without the environmental regulations, most of that business has been taken over now by technology, robots and machines that do not require the coal mine. Was that fair? Probably not, but it at least wasn't fair to those coal miners. But the economy and technology is not fair, and some people benefit and others are hurt. On that bright note.
I'm just curious about 3D printing and any impact that might have on on-demand inventory and how that might affect the supply chain in the future.
So, as it exists today, again, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen with 3D printing. We manufacture products and we play with 3D printers, and there's limits to building something on a 3D printer that will conduct electricity in the way that copper and magnets and ceramics do now. You could argue that you can print that. I know there's been some look at the load you could do with liquids. Can you print me a bottle of Tide detergent? And there's some that claim you can do that. And that's a distribution of resources and time to do that. If you take a 3D printer now that makes a hairdryer, we have expensive 3D printers, the amount of time it takes to do that under the current technology, I think, again, it's one of those things that you look at, can I monetize it? Great imagination, but do I have the ability to execute it at scale? I still think we're a ways off from it. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in it or look at it, but it's to make it a reality in a lot of the hard goods. Somebody, I remember reading somebody was able to, produce a sweater on a 3D printer. I try to wrap my head around how that happens. So there's technology out there that I'm not aware of, but to do it in meaningful scale in the short term, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm curious. Do you have insight into 3D printing that we do not? Okay.
Well, I thank you all very much for staying. I'd like to thank again the University of Arkansas Walton School of Business, Gearwood Greenheart, our sponsors. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I'd like to thank you, our remaining guests, and www.interdependence.org for the presentations that were made here today, or to gain more information about where you can come and see us again. Thank you all for coming.